Hello there and welcome to Module 2 of Professional Ethics. This module is a bit more vast and a bit more diverse than Module 1. So let's get started. Now, unlike Module 1 where we basically covered the entire module, Module 2 is a bit more diverse. So we are focusing on the important subjects, as you can see in the slide over here. The couple of topics which have been highlighted is what we'll be covering in this presentation. So when it comes to existing, we can't really call ourselves as independent because we are dependent on our family, on nature, etc. But we can call ourselves autonomous. What does autonomy mean? Autonomy means we are free to control our own actions. So taking these definitions into morality, what is moral autonomy? Moral autonomy is when we are in control of our own moral principles and our own moral decision making. So how do you become morally autonomous? It's not like you're born with all these moral principles, right? So that's where moral development comes in. So now we'll be delving more into the moral development theories right after this. But as of now, moral development is when you develop a sense of morality and an understanding for what morality is, what morals are, what morals work for you, etc., through your childhood by the time you become an adult.
So before we start on theory, let's talk about the man himself, Lawrence Kohlberg. Now, Lawrence Kohlberg was an American psychologist. He was very much interested in the development of children and their minds, etc., which is why he followed up on the word of Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget. Now, Piaget, his work was 25 years old, and it mainly consisted of dividing the mental development of the child through years. As in the first 2 years, they're just developing like sensory skills or being able to move around, motory skills, etc. Lawrence Kohlberg did not focus on that aspect, as in the entire mind. He built on top of that, basically dividing the development of a child and therefore their morality. Kohlberg's theory is as the child grows up and they're able to interact with the world at a much more complex level, they would be able to interact at the world at a much more higher morally complex level. So before we get into the different stages of Kohlberg's theory, we must understand these three levels called pre-convention, convention, and post-convention. Now, what do they mean? Let's look at the term convention itself. Convention is when you follow certain rules or you follow certain actions because that is the standard. There is a normalcy to them. Like, for example, in Kerala, we always have the habit of taking off our footwear before we enter someone's house or before we enter someone's religious place. So this, obviously there's a logical side to this, which is that you don't want to track dirt into that area. But then this is now a convention and it's kind of exclusive to Kerala or of course a lot of Indian states. Now taking this as a convention, what is pre-convention is when you follow these rules but not because you understand them. Right. You do that because you're either afraid someone will punish you if you don't follow the rules, or you know that someone might reward you if you follow the rules. But the rules themselves, they don't matter to you. You're not really aware of what happens if you follow the rules or not. Then, of course, you get into convention where you start following the rules when you realize, okay, this is why I follow the rules. I need to do certain things. I need to take off my footwear before entering someone's house. I need to stand in queue properly while waiting at the ATM. I need to talk to people politely in places of education or some other institution. Now, what is post-convention? Post-convention comes after convention. It is after you realize that, yes, there are certain rules to society and they work for the betterment of society. But unfortunately, you start thinking critically about these rules, why we do certain things. And you realize that some of these rules are flawed. Some of these conventions, which everyone wants to conform to, they don't make sense during the entire time. So you reach a level called post-convention, where you finally decide some rules matter, yes, but others don't exactly make sense, and you're not violating them in some sense of rebellion, but you would not perform a certain convention or a rule or a norm because it does not logically make sense to you with regards to ethical principles or human rights. And these three compose of the three levels which we need to look into before going into Kohlberg's theory. Now, as seen in the previous slide, you have the first level of preconvention, and underneath that level, you have two stages: obedience and punishment, and individualism and exchange.
So let's start with obedience and punishment. This is the first stage of you interacting with convention or having some sort of moral development. What is obedience and punishment? As you can see, it's something with which we generally used to train animals, that too not very intelligent animals, but sort of intelligent animals. Obedience and punishment is basically, if you do something wrong, you will be punished for it. Therefore, you will develop this sense that, okay, I should not do that. It's as simple as that. It's that you should avoid doing certain things because you will be punished for it, and you're not really sure why it's wrong, what needs to actually be done, etc. What's the logic behind it? From here you can get to level 2. Now level 2 of this development would be individualism and exchange. This is kind of a direct the evolution of obedience and punishment, in that it's still pretty selfish. It's kind of like thinking, if I do something right, I'll be rewarded for it. See, kind of that's why it's similar. Like if I do something wrong, I'll be punished for it. But if I do the opposite, and if I do something right, I'll be rewarded for it. Therefore, now you will start to do the right things, kind of different from avoiding to do the wrong things, but still pretty selfish at heart. Now, how do you compare these two things to, let's say, your academic life? Obedience and punishment. First level is when you were at school and you knew that you had to come to class wearing a full-fledged uniform. Now, if you avoided going to school in that uniform, they would punish you for it. They tell you have to stand outside of class. So, therefore, you decided, okay, maybe if I wear my uniform properly, that way I will not be punished because I don't want to stand outside of class away from my friends. Next level, individualism and exchange. That's when you realize that if you come not just in your uniform, but in a very neatly dressed uniform that's properly ironed by your parents, etc. Because we are thinking at a very rudimentary level. I mean, we are thinking at like a kindergarten level. So if you get your parents to press your uniform, now it's very clean, then you'll be rewarded for it. The teacher might compliment your uniform saying, oh, this is a very nicely dressed student. And you enjoy the compliment and the attention you get from the teacher. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people never develop out of this level. A lot of people in academics are still at the level of preconvention, where you're doing the right things because you want a reward, or you avoid doing the wrong things because you're basically avoiding punishment.
Now, at the next level of convention, we have the next two stages, stages 3 and 4, respectively, which are good boy and good girl and law and order.
What is the status of good boy and good girl? Now you're past the selfish ideas of avoiding punishment or getting rewards. You want to make a good impression. You want to be a good boy or a good girl. This can be subtle things, such as sitting in front of class, because unfortunately we consider that people who sit in front bench are studious, people who sit in back bench are bad students. But that is, again, that's part of our convention. So you kind of follow that convention so that you'd get the title of a good boy or a good girl. Now, beyond that, you have law and order. That's when you realize that you should do the right thing so that the law and order, or rather the balance of society, is maintained. You are not doing the wrong thing so that you will not disturb this delicate balance, therefore inconveniencing someone else. And in fact, you want to do the right thing so that everything works out smoothly for everyone. and you want to maintain this law and order because you're aware of the convention, you know what they are for, you know how they help other people, so you contribute towards it. This could be something as simple as standing in queue rather than breaking queue, or when you're following traffic rules so that you know everything works smoothly and no one is late due to traffic.
Now, finally, at level 3, we have post-convention. And what comes underneath that? By this point, you realize that there are some rules or some ethical principles which you need to go by because that is the standard. That is how you conform to society so that you are in agreement with most people. But then at post-conventional level, you reach what is Stage 5, social contract. This is when you realize that following some rules makes sense, like standing in queue at an ATM. But other rules don't exactly make sense, like what women would have faced in the workplace due to like in the form of any form of harassment. So this might be a normal, this might be part of the convention, this might be a standard, but then that's not the right thing. Exactly. So which is why we need to go for social contract, which is when we need to go against some of the conventions or some of the rules because it is not ethically right. Now, at the final stage, we have universal ethical principles. This is when you take your values, what are important to you, and you apply them in a post-conventional manner, wherein basically you're saying that I know society's rules are followed by many, but it still has many flaws. It still has many issues from time to time. And in order to not do the wrong thing, we basically go by our own universal ethical principles.
And now we come to Gilligan's theory of development, of moral development. And who is Carol Gilligan to begin with? Carol Gilligan was a research assistant to Kohlberg. So she was exposed to a lot of Kohlberg's work. And therefore, she had a pretty good understanding of how the work went, which is why she was one of the biggest critics of Kohlberg's work. What Carol Gilligan said was that Kohlberg's work focused exclusively on boys or how boys would react to a moral dilemma. So they would react with a sense of justice, basically saying that something is not right, therefore I should make it right, so that it's all fair in the end. Gilligan gave it another dimension, which is some considered care, as in it's not just enough that the right thing is done. You must also care or show compassion towards your fellow human beings. This ethics of care is what she is most widely known by. So let us explore what the ethics of care are with the same 3 stages, that is pre-convention, convention and post-convention. So as you can see, the stages are slightly different for Carol Gilligan's ethics of care. At the pre-convention level, you have survival. Now, survival is, once again, when you think about pre-convention under Kohlberg, it's basically being selfish. You realize that looking out for yourself is the best thing you need to do. So it might be something as avoiding getting involved in someone else's matter, even though if you can help them, but you avoid doing that simply because you're selfish, you don't want to take the extra effort or something. Now, at the next level, you have sacrifice or convention, when you realize that at some points you need to sacrifice your own convenience or your money or your sense of peace for the sake of someone else because you care about them, right? So once again, this is all about the ethics of care. At first level, you're being selfish, you only care about yourself. At the second level, you care about other people as well because some people are important to you. But obviously, we care only for certain people. You can't say that I care about every single human being on the planet. There are like over 7 billion human beings. So that is level 2, sacrifice. But level 3 is where you do exactly what I just mentioned, which is you care about every single human being, which is where you realize the concept of non-violence as propagated by the father of our nation, Mahatma Gandhi, wherein you need to do the right thing, not just for yourself, not just for the people you care about, but for everybody involved. And non-violence. So violence does not necessarily just mean like shooting someone or punching someone. Violence could be in the form of verbal violence. It could be in the form of financial violence. So you avoid all violence of all types so that no one is harmed or injured through your actions. And you also make sure that other people's actions do not harm or injure others, because you universally believe in the concept of non-violence, which is the post-conventional stage in the ethics of care.
As you can see, this is slightly different from Kohlberg's theory. The pattern kind of remains the same. We have the same three levels. At level 1, we have pre-convention. Level 2, we have convention. And finally, level 3, we have post-convention. Except the different stages in between are slightly different. So let's explore them one by one. At the first pre-convention level, you have survival. Now, survival is kind of similar to what Kohlberg had stated. It is that you are acting in a very selfish manner, where you are basically saying, I don't care about others, I only care for myself. So you end up looking out only for yourself. Level 2 or convention is about sacrifice. Now at this stage, it is a bit more complicated. So when I say sacrifice, you would obviously be thinking about someone who decides the other person is more important to me than my own happiness. So I will sacrifice my happiness for the other person. Now this might seem fine at the surface level, but at the same time, a sacrifice can go both ways. When we think of sacrifice, of course, we can take the example of soldiers or mothers who are sacrificing their own happiness for others. Now, of course, the other person remains happy, but what about the persons themselves? A mother might want to do other things, but then she had to sacrifice her happiness for her children or maybe even her husband. On the other hand, a soldier might have wanted to do other things as well, but he had to sacrifice his life, he or she had to sacrifice his life for his country. So this is both the advantage and disadvantage of the convention level, which is when sacrifice works. So what is the third level, which is non-violence, as propagated by the father of our nation, Mahatma Gandhi? Non-violence is when you decide to have a dialogue and make it so that no one's happiness needs to be sacrificed, neither yours nor mine. So at the first level, I am being selfish. I don't want to sacrifice my happiness for anyone. At the second level, I am ready to sacrifice everything for you, even if it means a lot of dissatisfaction for me. Level 3, no one needs to be dissatisfied. Everyone can be happy. Let's sit down. Let's negotiate. Let's have a non-violent peace process.